Hi guys, this is Robin and this is my entry for the Down and Dirty Weathering Contest number 3 over at JC's RIP track on YouTube. So here is the model I choose to weather. It's an Overland model, brass locomotive. It's a 6-axle Norfolk Southern Dash9 locomotive, and next up there will be a picture of the prototype, which is just a rough plan on how I want to do this project and not an exact replica. Next up you can see my very first step, which is the masking of the whole unit. For this I use the tools which are seen in the video, and I also prefer the Tamiya masking tape. However, I am not sponsored in any way by Tamiya, it's just the materials I prefer to use for this step. After the masking we will jump right into the fading process. First up I spray the setting coat on the whole locomotive, and then you can see all the oil paints I used for the fading step. So I use oil brushes as well as regular oil paints, which I prefer the Abteilung 502 paints, a small brush, some thinner, and then I apply all the little oil dots right onto the locomotive. In the video shown you will see me use both the oil brusher as well as use a regular brush. However, I want to mention that the oil paints I use, they have some linseed thinner, so that's why I put those paints right onto a little piece of cardboard. The next step is the blending on the individual oil dots, for which I use a variety of different brushes. Some are a little more stiff, some are very soft and gentle, and then I just try to blend each oil dot onto the surface of the whole locomotive before we jump onto the next step, which will be another layer of a setting coat, for which I use a 10:1 mix of Future Floor and X21 by Tamiya. I mix the Future Floor X21 mixture with some alcohol, put it right into my airbrush and spray it onto the locomotive, which you can see here. So this step is essential before we jump onto our next step, which will be the wash technique, for which I used the here shown bottle of ammo by MiG 1203, which is a grimy paint mixture, which works very good on different variety of locomotives and also on freight cars. It's one of my favorite paints which I use for this step, and I use it right out of the bottle. However, you can also mix it a little bit with some odorless mineral spirit if you prefer, but it's not really necessary. It works fine, just make sure to shake the bottle very well. I also have some steel balls in the bottle, which makes it a bit easier to mix the whole paint. If this wash mixture does not flow nicely, you can pre-wet the surface with some odorless mineral spirit if you prefer. I always try first to use the paint right out of the bottle. If it does not flow nicely, I do some pre-wetting on the surface with the ammo by MiG thinner, but it's up to you if you want to do this or not. Probably the most important thing on the wash technique is to hit the whole model. Each nook, each cranny, each door panel should have some wash flown around it. It also pops up some very nice details which otherwise couldn't be seen from the distance we have on our layouts. Once the wash is applied to the whole model, I will let it dry for about 20 to 30 minutes. It really depends on the humidity you face where you live. And here is a short picture where you can see how the wash dries, and the next step will be the blending and cleaning of the wash on the locomotive. For the blending and cleaning process, I use a soft brush and work gently around the surface of the locomotive. Just make sure to leave the pigments and the color only in the door panels and around the details, and not on the surface itself of the locomotive. If you do start the blending process a little bit too early and the thinner is not vaporized so far, you will see that you move all the pigments around the whole locomotive. That's not a problem at all, just make sure to let it set and dry for maybe 10 minutes. In addition, come back and try again. After the blending process, I leave the locomotive to dry for about 24 to 48 hours, since this wash is also oil-based. Right after this step, we will come back with a matte coat and spray the whole locomotive with a nice solid matte coat. Adding powders onto a model is not a rocket science by itself, but it takes some time and some practice, especially when you try it for the first time. So after the matte coat had dried on the model, I come back with some pan pastels and some Monroe powders. The Monroe powders have the advantage that they are a little bit sticky compared to the pan pastels. And also another reason why I do not spray dull coat. Dull coat often eliminates the effect on pan pastels. It works a little bit better with Monroe powders, but it still is a very aggressive medium to use. That's why I prefer the matte coat. On the sides of the locomotive, I use some raw sienna, some burnt sienna, different shades of gray, of brown, some black. Especially on the roof around the exhaust stack, you will see me using a little bit of a smaller brush. There I use Soot by Monroe, which is my absolutely go-to color for roof stacks and for these diesel locomotives. And on the sides there is a little bit more brown, and I also use some dark earth and some black on the roller bearings on the trucks of the locomotive. After adding the powders, I come back with the same matte coat we used before the powder effect, and sometimes it's needed to do this step repeatedly, since the matte coat also eliminates some degree of the powder effects. I used a total of 3 or 4 layers for this project. After I was happy with the results, I also added some dirt on the walkways, on the roof stack, on the front and rear end of the locomotive. Around the fuel tank you will see some black stripes which come from the fuel when they have some spillage effect, and also the general dirt and grime which is added all around the whole unit. Once I'm happy with the effect, I add a very last matte coat onto the whole locomotive and let it dry again for around 12 to 24 hours. It really depends on my working schedule, how I have the time to work on the model, but at least it needs a couple of hours to completely dry, and that you can see the final effect on the powder and pastel work before you jump right on to the next step. The very last step on this project after the matte coat had dried was to paint the grills on the dynamic brakes of the locomotive with a dark rusty color, since I double checked the prototype and it showed a kind of a rusty reddish brownish effect on those grills. I used a combination of some oils and some acrylics and let that dry as well. Finally, after everything dried completely, I took the model, brought it outside and took some pictures in the sunlight. I made some pictures all around the whole locomotive, which are shown here, and there is also one more picture of the prototype, I think, to roughly compare it. So this is it, this is the final model, this is the final result out in the sunlight, which always makes for the best pictures. I hope you guys liked the video and liked the tutorial. This was my very first attempt on doing not only a video but a whole series on how I do use some different paints and techniques. So I hope you liked it and take care. See you!